Hey there, Postal here. So today we're going to be doing a little preview of the upcoming week for March of Nations for the British. No gameplay again, so sorry if you're looking for that, but it is giving a heads up on exactly what you're in store for, or if you even want to spend any time going down the British line if you haven't, decided that already. Um, and for me, the British tech tree was was just like one of my favorite. I mean, look at all the friggin' British planes I've got in the game. And the only reason I haven't kept the Spitfires at tier 6 and tier 7 is because, I mean, it's just kind of more of the same with Spitfires. They're great, but like, okay, how many Spitfires do you need? So, there's not a whole lot as far as lines are concerned. There's no attack aircraft in the normal tech tree. There's no bombers. But what there is here is pretty darn good. So we're going to do like we did with the Americans. And we're just start from left to right. So the fighter line for the British, and actually I'm gonna preface this whole thing is I highly recommend going for as many of the tier 10s in the British lines as possible. The Swift, Hunter, and Javelin are awesome planes. The Swift is probably the most difficult of the three of them to use. I'm not even going to say probably. It is the most difficult, but we'll get to that in a moment. But you definitely, I highly recommend going down all three of these lines, if you can. So, fighters. The fighters have, the quintessential, as far as Americans think of, we think of Spitfires. And that's what this line is. This whole line is very maneuverable. It's not the most maneuverable in the game. It's going to get outmaneuvered. The Spitfires are going to get outmaneuvered by Zeros and even the Yaks. But this whole line is right up there as far as maneuverability is concerned. The reason it's actually better than those two lines is because you get significant altitude performance that you don't get in those other lines. And you have more airspeed, and your guns, this is a well-rounded machine. I'll typically pick on Spitfires and people that like specialized Spitfires. I'm not really picking on them. I'm picking on them not because they're flying a Spitfire, I guess I should say. I'm picking on them because they're picking such a strong plane. Like, okay, we get it. We know the Spitfire's great, and it is great. But, branch out. Do some other stuff. Spitfires, there's so many times I'll be, up at 7,000 feet and a Spitfire will be up there just like freaking kicking my butt because, you don't think of a turn fighter being able to come up there and have any kind of impact. The Spitfires, more than any other turn fighter, are able to get up to higher altitudes and have an impact up there. They can't necessarily live up there like a BF-109 or a P-51. But they can get up there easily enough and have an impact and then head back down to where it's more comfortable. Spitfire's really, really good. This is the first line I ever went down. And I had a super huge shock when I got to tier 9 and tier 10. The attacker loses some of that maneuverability like all jets tend to do. You lose maneuverability because you're getting so much speed. And the attacker does have a lot of speed. It's still pretty maneuverable for a jet. But it is definitely a difference in gameplay because you gain so much of that speed. But the attacker is one of the most beloved, maybe beloved's not the right word, but loved by the community, tier 9 fighters. It seems to be one of those that you'll tend to see flown quite a bit. The Swift, less so. And the reason the Swift is less so is because it kind of does a 180 from what you're used to with the Spitfires. The attacker is kind of a segue between the Spitfire 14 and the Swift in that this is medium altitude per the stats, although it can get up higher. Medium altitude, very turny, decent airspeed for a tier 8 fighter. Swift is the fastest fighter in the game, base. Pretty good altitude performance, loses so much maneuverability when you just have the base plane. And on top of that, the guns are two 30mm cannons. So if you've watched any of my videos, two 30mm cannons can be so frustrating because you're only shooting two. You're not really spraying and praying like when you've got four. You're firing four. You're shotgun effect. You've got a much better chance of hitting things. When it's just two 30mm cannons, they overheat so quickly. You've really got to have patience and be tapping your trigger, not holding it down. That being said, the Swift is a lot of fun. I really didn't like it when I first got it. Really, really didn't like it. But I actually love it at this point now that I'm used to how to play the guns. The airframe itself is really strong. But that being said, this is not, as far as tier 10 is concerned, this is not a tier 10 line I would make like an early push for. The Spitfires are great, but as far as pushing to tier 10, there's better tier 10s for a new player. The Swift you'll come around to, I'm sure, though. A very enjoyable line. These planes, the Spitfires, you'll keep and just keep playing because they are a lot of fun and very very forgiving airframes. So for multi-rolls, this is the newest of the 3 lines here, although it's been I guess a couple years now that it came out. These multi-rolls are more air-to-air impact typically than they are air-to-ground. There are quite a bit, I mean there's obviously rockets and bombs available on all of these, but the reload tends to be kind of low, high on them, and on top of that there isn't nearly as much ground attackability as there are with other multi-rolls in the game. However, it makes up for that lack of ground impact with a greater impact on air-to-air engagement. These airplanes are very maneuverable for multi-rolls. Make sure we're aware of that. They can't dogfight a Spitfire, right? They're not going to dogfight, I don't think, really any fighters in the game. If you catch a fighter out, catch them by surprise, especially like a BF-109 or a P-51, you might have enough time with your excellent 20mm cannons to kill them before they can really get away, but you're not going to be able to like straight up dogfight them for a long time, right? You can't turn circles around those types of planes. They are very good at taking out other multi-rolls. They're very good at taking out heavies just because their guns are just strong enough. These 20mm Hispano cannons are so good, so consistent, and I really, really like this line. The Seahawk still has those cannons. It loses a lot of maneuverability, gains a lot of airspeed, and it tends to be kind of the unloved plane on this line. I particularly like it, but I can see why people wouldn't. It's kind of, you just go fast in a straight line kind of thing. It's got a bunch of rockets that are on it, and rockets can be annoying, especially at the higher tiers in my opinion, because like you have to set aside a certain amount of time to fire your rockets and get them in line, whereas a bomb, you're just going to drop it and forget it. And so in the higher tiers, everything's moving so quickly, you take 10 seconds to line up your rockets or have to get really low to get your rockets down there, and it takes you out of the battle or puts you in a bad position. So I can understand why people don't like the Seahawk. But it does lead to the Hunter, which is probably the best tier 10 multi-roll in the game. The Hunter has 4 30mm cannons, ridiculously hard-hitting cannons. You lose any kind of maneuverability that you might have been used to previous to this plane. You gain a ton of airspeed. Your gun armament is as good as any heavy fighter in the game. And on top of that, you get both bombs and rockets and a ton of rockets. You can do a lot with the Hunter. It's a multi-roll in the truest of senses. You need to take out air-to-air aircraft. Holy crap, Postal. This plane can definitely do that. You need to take out ground targets. This plane can definitely do that. Hunter is probably one of the more seen planes out there in the game, at tier 10 multi-rolls, I should say. It's not as flexible as some of the other planes out there because of its lack of maneuverability, but just everything about its offensive power is top-notch. You can't go wrong with the Hunter's ability to influence a game and completely turn around a game if played properly in the Hunter. Really, really fun line. Even, like I said, even the Seahawk that people don't like isn't a bad plane. It's just kind of an odd plane in the transition from the tier 8 to the tier 10. Definitely enjoy that line. And then finally we've got the British heavy fighters. So the British heavy fighters, to be honest, are probably one of the least... I mean, there's gems on the line, but it's kind of one of the least played lines. When you go out there, you don't see a bunch of Hornets flying around by humans anyway. You definitely don't see a lot of P1056s and 228s. This kind of middle ground is you just don't see a lot of people playing them, and because of that, you don't see a whole lot of javelins out there. Although I think the javelin might be all three tier 10 heavies are absolutely excellent, and so there's no reason to not have a javelin if you can get a javelin. The Blenheim, the Blenheim and the Bowfighter, it's funny about them. The Blenheim really feels to me like a super fat multi-role plane. And, so I play it like a super fat multi-role plane. And I have great success as a super fat multi-role plane. And to be honest, I think from tier 4 through tier 7, they should be played as super fat multi-role planes, because they've got such great ground impact. Their bombs and rockets reload very, very quickly. Their cannons hit very, very hard. Where they lack and where the community can get frustrated by them is their lack of airspeed and their lack of altitude performance when compared to other heavies. But if you play it more like a multi-role, in that, and by multi-role I mean avoiding basically most dogfighting situations, focusing on dropping ground targets, and then focusing your guns on targets of opportunity, rather than trying to play it like a heavy fighter like you would on the German or American lines, where you can just kind of like chase down people and boom and zoom. The problem with the British line is there's really no zoom, and so if you get yourself stuck in, you can't get out because you don't have the airspeed to get out of a bad situation like you do in a lot of other heavy fighters. And that's what I mean by multi-role playing. You can't get away in most multi-role planes. So you have to play with your head on a swivel, make decisions, what's best as far as which aircraft to attack kind of thing, what's going to keep you alive. Think of it as more as keeping you alive rather than killing the enemy, if that makes sense. And so I really enjoyed these planes. Obviously, I've kept them. Bowfighter is probably one of the most loved tier 5 heavy fighters, because you've got that crazy fun, you can't see it in the picture here, let's go to the view in the hangar. You've got the crazy fun rear gunner that can actually face forward. So, I mean, a lot of people like this plane. It is a fun plane. Probably one of the best tier 5 heavy fighters in the game. But then, you got the Mosquito, which loses that rear gunner. Hornet doesn't have the rear gunner, but again, most people play them like you can zoom, and you can't zoom in those planes, but you can do a lot of ground damage. P1056, one of my favorite planes in the game, honestly. It's great tier 8 heavy fighter. Ugly as can be, but again, you want to play it. Your ground armament reloads very, very quickly. And then you've got just some stupid great guns. You've got 4 20mm cannons and 2, 40mm cannons, I think, if I remember correctly. That's been too long since I've played it. Right? 40mm cannons? Yes. These things hit like a freaking, like, bombs to the face in the air. They're just nuts. You see damage impacting on bombers. Like, you just see their hit points on bombers and heavy planes and ground attack planes just melt away with these 40mm cannons. They're a little wonky because they're on the wings. But, that being said, the overall platform is really, really good. Again, you just have no maneuverability, and so you want to make sure that you're not getting yourself in a bad position. P228 and the Javelin go to 4 30mm cannon configuration. The 228, in my opinion, actually has the cannon set up better because they're all on the nose, so you're just kind of you're able to focus it a lot better. Unfortunately, you're just kind of stuck with 16 rockets, which, again, at this tier, if you're only using rockets, it can be frustrating because you've got to kind of take yourself out of battle to fire these rockets. It's a pretty fast plane. It's not like the most fast at this tier. It's got good altitude performance, but not the best altitude performance at this tier. It's really, in my opinion, about the guns and getting the guns on this plane on target. You can be impactful. It's not my favorite, but it's not a bad plane by any means. You just don't see it though. But man, the 30mm cannons on the 228 really make this plane shine. When you have good games in it, it's because the cannons are doing what you want them to do. When you have bad games in it, it's because you're relying on your rockets. kind of thing. So, but the whole line ends with the Javelin. It's just an absolutely fun plane. The 30 mil cannons are on like the cowl, like the side of the cowling, so they can kind of spread out a little bit, which is a little annoying. There's no bombs on this plane, which is just really weird for a heavy plane. Like there's not even an option. But what you do get with this plane is the most hit points for a tier 10 heavy, the most maneuverability, which doesn't really mean anything because this maneuverability still sucks, and it's just barely better. But great airspeed, great altitude performance. Granted, all the planes at this tier have great airspeed and great altitude performance as far as heavy planes are concerned. But what makes this plane shine is the gun armament. You can sit behind a bomber or a GA, and you don't care about the rear gunner, and it doesn't matter the bomber or the GA. You've got the hit points, you've got the armor to be able to just kind of sit there and take it, and you've got the gun power to dish it back out to them. If I'm in a tier 10 bomber, tier 10 GA, like my worst enemy is going to be a Javelin, just because you can tear up 262 a little bit more. The XF90, the guns are good, but they don't hit like the frickin' Javelin's guns hit, and so you've got less time to defend yourself against a Javelin than you would against those other planes. So, anywho, kind of like my previous assessment, I've got a lot of positive things to say about the British lines. In my opinion, this is probably one of the best tech trees, like overall tech trees in the game. Really solid abilities. I just recommend like really pushing as hard as you can on any one of these given lines. I hope I gave you a little bit of perspective. If you got any questions about any of them, specifically, feel free to reach out to me either on Discord or via the comments. And yeah, do you have the same assessment as I do on these lines? Have you gotten to tier 10 on all of them? If not, are you having struggles on any particular portion of any of the particular lines? Most people have struggles here. I can definitely understand why. But anyway, hope you enjoyed this video. I definitely hope it was helpful. Give it a thumbs up if it was helpful. Thumb me down if it wasn't, so I stop making these specific type videos. And otherwise, I hope you have a great day.